Thursday, September 16th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the Week 2 Preview Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smolin. Jared, this week is starting out with a game that absolutely nobody is looking forward to. So I feel like we should just go ahead and jump in and get it over with. Giants against Washington on Thursday night.
Yeah, 40.5 point over-under. I think, the fewer guys you have from this game, the better you're going to be feeling, going into Sunday. On the Giants, I think Saquon Barkley is where we should start because, I have him on a few teams and I'm deciding whether or not I want to start him. And it's versus guys like Jamal Williams and Leonard Fournette. Barkley, he played 48% of the snaps in week 1, only ran a route on 38% of the pass plays, finished with 10 carries, 3 targets. And on a short week now, in a tough matchup, I don't think his volume is going to be much different than that. I think that's kind of what you're expecting, like 12 to 15 opportunities. And, this matchup is just as tough as Denver was, if not tougher.
Yeah, you could say that they limited his week 1 participation to get him ready for this short turnaround, but playing a football game 4 days later is hard no matter what. Whether you're coming back from knee injury, whether you're at full health, whether you played a full game, whether you just got hit a little bit, it's a tough thing to do. So I don't think that we can expect a good game. We always know that big things are possible from Saquon Barkley. Maybe he can touch the ball 12 times and score, but it's not a good spot. I would certainly try to sit him if I can help it. I mean, you don't have to. You can still like the long term on Saquon Barkley. You can still like the ceiling this season and yet also not take the chance on him in week 2 on short rest.
I would actually be trying to buy Saquon after this game, assuming he doesn't, find the end zone or break off a long play. I think week 3 is when we might start to see him closer to a full workload, when he's going to have had 10 days to rest. The Giants offense is still a concern, but if you're getting Barkley, something close to his usual workload, I still think he's an RB1. And if he bombs again, on national TV tonight, I think you might be able to get him for cheaper than that.
Do you know offhand who the week 3 matchup is?
I do not.
Well, I'll let you look that up while I talk about somebody else. But as you mentioned, we saw the playing time, disappointing in week 1, 10 carries as well, 2.6 yards per rush, 8% target share. So really there's nothing that we can point to from that matchup with Denver and say this is a reason to be optimistic for Saquon Barkley in week 2. So sorry, you got to treat him like somebody else this week.
It's the Falcons in week 3, by the way. So, that's a good spot. It's the Saints after that. So the schedule toughens again, but the Falcons in week 3 definitely could be kind of the, breakout spot for Saquon this season.
Yeah, and we'll get to the Saints in a little bit and see if maybe see what we can expect from them going forward. But elsewhere on the Giants offense, like you said, it's just kind of a gross fantasy situation here. Daniel Jones did wind up 14th among fantasy QBs in week 1. That was thanks largely to a rushing touchdown. He also last season threw for 112 yards and 212 yards in his 2 meetings with this Washington team. He was just okay overall against Denver last week. There's really no reason to be optimistic for Daniel Jones in week 2, I would say.
No, like a low end quarterback too, super flex 2 quarterback leagues. Maybe you're having to deal with Daniel Jones, but Daniel Jones against that Washington pass rush is, a nightmare, I think. And, 18.5 point implied total for the Giants. Not a good play, Daniel Jones this week.
It was a fine debut for Kenny Golladay, but you'd like to see more separation and usage between him and Darius Slayton. I would say Sterling Shepard is pretty easily the comfiest Giants bet for me. And I say that with him like low wide receiver 3 range.
Yeah, I think that's where he belongs. I think Shepard's the best fantasy bet among Giants wide receivers, at least until, Golladay shows us otherwise. Golladay wasn't really limited in week 1. He played 85% of the snaps, saw 6 targets. It was a 16% target share, but, Shepard saw 9 targets. Shepard ran more routes, played more snaps than Kenny Golladay. And Shepard just has that rapport with Daniel Jones. So I think it's going to take a little while for Golladay to potentially catch up with Shepard there.
I'll be curious to see if the usage among the wide receivers changes at all when Evan Engram comes back. We already know Evan Engram's not going to be playing tonight. He's more of a slot receiver than Kyle Rudolph is, obviously. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a little bit less Darius Slayton once Engram returns, but, can't say that until we actually see it. Rudolph, as it was, led Giants tight ends at a 62% route rate in week 1. So, if you're in a really deep league and are desperate for a tight end, Kyle Rudolph is playing, but he's certainly not somebody to go after.
Yeah, he did play ahead of Caden Smith, but that's kind of the best you can say about Kyle Rudolph.
On the Washington side, no Ryan Fitzpatrick complicates things a bit, but we can't I don't think that we can downgrade for Taylor Heinicke. The last time that we saw him in a full game, he threw for 306 yards, ran for another 46 yards in that playoff loss to Tampa. I mean, people were so excited about him that others had to quickly run out the story about him wearing a MAGA hat just to temper that excitement.
And I thought he played pretty well in relief of Fitzpatrick in week 1. He went 11 of 15 for 122 yards and a touchdown, ran for another 17 yards. He's going to give you some rushing production. So, like, Daniel Jones versus Taylor Heinicke, if you're in a 2-quarterback Superflex league, I think they're pretty similar. I might even lean towards Heinicke in this matchup. I do think he's a slight downgrade from Fitzpatrick, or at least he's at least a downgrade from like good Fitzpatrick. Like he's not going to give this offense those ceiling weeks. But I do still think, Terry McLaurin, Logan Thomas, Antonio Gibson, those guys can stay in fantasy lineups, knock them down, half a tier maybe. But I think they're all fine to keep in there. I think Heinicke's good enough to keep those guys afloat.
And he's enough that there was some, at least minor chatter through the summer about maybe Taylor Heinicke had a shot at fighting for the starting job. I don't think that was ever a reality, but it at least means that he was playing decently through the summer. And Terry McLaurin kind of got going after Taylor Heinicke went into that game. As you mentioned, he was pretty good last week, had a 119.3 passer rating for that game against the Chargers. So, again, I'm not really downgrading anyone here. There's not anybody that I'm excited about going in. I am uneasy about Terry McLaurin, but I can't bet against him either. And I mean that literally. I was looking at the underdog over-under stuff. He's at 73.5 over-under for yardage for the game. And I can't bet Terry McLaurin either way on that.
Yeah, that's about right. I don't know. What do we have projected for? I could pull it up right now. We
68 yards.
Oh, 68 yards. So, yeah, pretty good line. So the thing about Washington last week is they only ran 49 plays. And they only threw it 21 times. So, all of their passing game production and volume was kind of muted. Even if the offense struggles a bit with Heinicke, they're going to run more plays and they're going to pass more than that.
Yeah, Logan Thomas got just 3 targets in the opener because of the factor that you just mentioned. McLaurin, Thomas, and Dyami Brown were the clear top 3 Washington players in routes. McLaurin is 100%. The other 2 guys each hit 93%. Broncos tight ends combined, by the way, for 10 catches, 78 yards, and a touchdown on 12 targets against the Giants in week 1. So I think Logan Thomas has plenty of upside in this matchup.
Yeah, again, I mean, he saw a 14% target share, which is a fine number. It's just they didn't throw much. He still played every single snap. He ran a route on 93% of the pass play. So all the usage was still there for Logan Thomas. So he's a guy I still feel fine with as like a lower end tight end one. Dyami Brown, I would not want to use him in season long, but if you're playing like DFS tonight, I kind of like him as a sneaky play. As you said, his playing time was right up there in week 1. And, the Giants also struggled, I think, against KJ Hamler, another like speedy wide receiver. Hamler dropped what would have been a 50-yard touchdown in week 1. I think Dyami Brown's a similar type of player. So don't be surprised if he breaks off a long play tonight.
Yeah, he had a shorter ADOT than we expected in week 1, but obviously we know that the talent is there for Dyami Brown to get downfield. It only takes a play for him to make a fantasy day there. Antonio Gibson, by the way, we're talking about usage for people. He's the guy in Washington who gave us all the usage that we were hoping for in the opener. 20 carries, 5 targets. That latter mark led the team. Only 1 target for J.D. McKissic. So if you drafted Antonio Gibson, you had to be happy with his week 1, even though he didn't find the end zone.
Yeah, definitely encouraging usage. Still lost most of the third downs to McKissic, but we talked about in the preseason, like Antonio Gibson can and will still see targets, even though he's not playing on all the third downs because Washington's scheming stuff up for him in the passing game. So Gibson looks like a weekly RB1 going forward. JD McKissic looks dead. Like I think even in PPR leagues, unless it's super deep, you can drop JD McKissic. He's just not going to ever be a guy you can trust in fantasy lineups.
I definitely agree with that, unless also Taylor Heinicke gets hurt and they re-sign Alex Smith. So then we're throwing right. 200 times at running backs.
Yeah.
Denver at Jacksonville. The Broncos are 6-point favorites on the road with a 45-point over-under. We had an efficient offensive day for the Broncos at the Giants last week. Now they get a Jacksonville team that allowed 449 yards and 37 points to Houston in week 1. So basically, just bet on anybody wearing a Broncos uniform at appropriate levels this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think Teddy Bridgewater is one of the better streaming options this week. He played well. He played like Teddy Bridgewater in the opener. He completed 78% of his passes, averaged just 7.3 yards per attempt, but threw 2 touchdowns. Should have had a third again if Hamler hadn't dropped that bomb. Didn't turn the ball over. Ran for 19 yards. He gives you that sneaky rushing upside. Losing Jerry Jeudy, obviously hurts, but in this matchup against Jacksonville, I think Teddy should have a solid fantasy day.
And of course, the first question is Jerry Jeudy with that high ankle sprain. What's the effect of that beyond Teddy Bridgewater, who I think will be fine because there's good enough receivers still there. But what's the effect on the other guys? Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler, anybody you like?
I mean, Patrick and Hamler, they were probably at this point already picked up in your league. I think we'll see. I mean, Hamler is the guy I like better as a prospect. I still think Patrick's going to be on the field a bit more, though. Hamler is the slot guy. But when they're in 2 wide receiver sets, it's going to be Tim Patrick out there. And Tim Patrick's a solid player. Like, he's not exciting, but I mean, he's been solid when given opportunities. So we'll see how it all shakes out. I think Patrick and Hamler are both, like, if kind of desperation plays, if you need someone this week because of the matchup. I'm excited for Courtland Sutton, though, too. I mean, I know he did nothing in the box score in week 1, but he played 80% of the snaps. So he was already almost a full-time player. He should be getting better off the ACL. And with Jeudy out, Sutton, if he's healthy, if he's close to 100%, should kind of reemerge as the clear top wide out here.
And we always make assumptions about what's happening in most leagues, but you and I heard from a customer this morning in a league where somebody dropped Courtland Sutton because of his bad week 1. I mean, if you drafted Courtland Sutton, I don't know how you drop him the week after Jerry Jeudy goes down for a month and a half or 2 months. I think I can't say for sure that Courtland Sutton is going to be the lead wide receiver target for Denver, but that's certainly the bet at this point. So, I mean, he belongs on teams. I think Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler both belong on rosters in leagues of 12 plus teams. And I think all of those guys are startable at certain levels this week. I'm not saying they're all top 30, but there are situations where each of those guys makes sense. And KJ Hamler is the exciting guy because he does all the downfield stuff and we want him to catch those deep balls. But Tim Patrick, as you said, is just always solid. He's any given week, he can give you a 4 for 67 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, it'd be Sutton, Patrick, Hamler if I'm ranking the 3 Broncos receivers for this week.
Yeah, same thing for me. Courtland Sutton led the team in routes last week, by the way. Poor PFF grade, but I mean, first game back from the knee. We have to assume he's the number 1 going forward, like I said. And this is just a good matchup for taking a chance on somebody knowing that there is downside risk. And before we get off the Denver side, well, I guess we got to hit the running backs. But before we get out of the passing game, wheels up on Noah Fant because I don't care about Albert O getting involved in that game. Fant's still tied for second on the team in routes, led the team in targets. He's an every week starter. I think he's a perfect fit for Teddy Bridgewater, especially now that Jerry Jeudy's out.
Yeah, 22% target share for Fant in week 1. Again, with Jeudy playing over half of that game, Fant looked awesome to me. So yeah, he's if you drafted Fant, I think you're going to be happy.
Mm-hmm. What about the running game? You got anything on the Denver running backs?
I mean, talk about an even split. Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams both played 50% of the snaps. Gordon ran a few more pass routes than Javonte Williams. It was 46% for Melvin Gordon, 37% for Javonte Williams. Williams ended up out carrying Gordon 14-11, but Williams got the final 3 carries of the game with the Broncos up like 20 points. So again, even that was basically split while the game was yet to be decided. So that's what it is for now. I think it's encouraging that Williams has already made this an even split, as a rookie versus, kind of a proven veteran in Melvin Gordon. So I like the long-term outlook for Javonte Williams. And I think this week, both these guys are in play as like RB3s because of the matchup.
I agree. And the 6-point line in Denver's favor can only support that. Before we get away from the Broncos, Jeremy Collier on YouTube wants to know Tim Patrick or James White in a full PPR. And I can understand it's close. For me, it's Tim Patrick because the targets he gets are going to be of the longer variety, so it's easier to score points on them.
Yeah, it's Patrick for me, and the other reason is because I don't think it's going to be a James White game versus the Jets. It should be a game the Patriots can control on the ground. So I think White's target value might be a bit lower than usual this week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll see what usual even is under the new circumstances in New England. On the other side of that game, Jacksonville, Trevor Lawrence fed himself in garbage time in week 1, more garbage time than we would have guessed. Also threw 3 interceptions against a Houston defense that really spent the offseason trying to get worse. So I'm not touching Trevor Lawrence if I don't have to against Denver this week.
Yeah, definitely benefited from that volume. He threw it 51 times. Jacksonville ran 68 plays, which is above average. Lawrence finished 28th in week 1 PFF passing grade. So definitely a shaky performance. And he's probably going to have a lot more garbage time games this season with how that Jags team looks. And it might even happen this week. But not something you love to rely on. And, this Broncos defense looks like it's going to be a problem. So, Lawrence definitely outside the top 12 quarterbacks this week.
And it's better to bet on garbage time for receivers than it is for quarterbacks, because chances are if a team gets into garbage time, the quarterback probably wasn't playing very well before that. So it's pretty risky to bet on a guy playing poorly and delivering you fantasy points. It's not always going to go the way that it did for Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, Lawrence's third TD last week, by the way, too, came with like 5 seconds left. So, I mean, he got lucky if you started him last week.
His wideouts, I think, are all in play. DJ Chark led with 12 targets in the opener, but caught just 3 of them. Marvin Jones led in routes, but all 3 of them were close in that category. And it was Jones and Laviska Shenault getting 9 targets apiece. I think the volume will be there. It would be Jones, Shenault, Chark for me still. To me, I'm just wondering if DJ Chark is going to be a less efficient version of Marvin Jones, which is already a little bit inefficient.
Right. Ugly result for DJ Chark. The usage was really good, though. He was second on the week in air yards, 199 air yards. Like you said, he led the Jags with 12 targets. He was 8th in our expected fantasy points model, which we're going to debut here. We're just basically just looking at all the usage a player gets, where it comes on the field, and kind of putting it all into one number based on what an average player would do. So Chark was 8th among all wide receivers in expected fantasy points. He well underperformed that, but if he keeps getting that usage, with a quality quarterback in Lawrence, who will start getting better, I think Chark could be a good buy low right now if his owner is disappointed with the week 1.
That's kind of too bad that he scored a touchdown in week 1. Otherwise, it would look worse than it did.
True.
The Jaguars' backfield is something I would definitely try not to use against Denver. It would still be James Robinson over Carlos Hyde, but the fact that that's even a question 1 week into the season makes me not want to play either guy in week 2.
Yeah, we've gone too long talking about the Jags without saying that Urban Meyer is the idiot that we kind of thought he was. Like I think he's just going to hamstring this offense all season, which sucks. James Robinson's usage was a bit better than if you're just looking at the final box score between him and Carlos Hyde. Robinson played 63% of the snaps. He ran a pass route on 64% of the pass plays and out targeted Hyde 6-2. So Robinson is at least the primary pass catching back here. Hyde ended up out carrying Robinson 9-5, but Hyde got 6 carries late in the game when it was over. So Robinson was even beating Hyde in carries for most of this game. Now Hyde is playing too much than he should be, more than we thought he was going to be. So that's going to be an issue. But I still think Robinson is like a lower end RB2 going forward. You kind of knock him probably back into RB3 range in this matchup, but he's not dead. He's probably not going to pay off if you took him in the 4th or even 5th round. But I think he's going to be a guy you can still start most weeks.
Yeah, I'm playing somebody like Jamal Williams over him this week, though, while we wait and see what usual looks like.
Yep, that's fair.
Let's end it on a semi-positive note for the Jaguars, because we all wondered whether they were heading into the season without a tight end. And James O'Shaughnessy is like, not so fast, my friend. This is Lee Corso. He tied Shenault for 3rd on the team in routes in week 1, 8 targets, 15.7% of Trevor Lawrence's total attempts. Chris Manhertz vultured a touchdown, but that was his only target. He only ran 8 routes. So it was James O'Shaughnessy for 44 targets in the game. I'm not saying that he's a must-own or even somebody that we're going to have to pay real attention to, but I think that James O'Shaughnessy could be this year what Eric Ebron was last year, which is tight end 15 in total in points per game.
Yeah, the Jag, who'd they add? Was it Hollister? Yeah, it was Hollister, right? Who ended up being a healthy scratch in week 1. So we'll see if he gets involved. I think O'Shaughnessy probably worth owning in like FFPC leagues and maybe like fantasy leagues of like 14 plus teams. Some of them we get to bye weeks could be useful. Just a guy who can give you 5-6 targets at tight end. But yeah, like you said, the usage, the pass routes, the targets were all there. And again, this Jags team, I think there's going to be a lot of pass heavy games for Jacksonville just because they're going to be trailing so often.
Yeah, maybe Dalton Schultz for last year's Cowboys is a better comparison. Plus, if you have James O'Shaughnessy, you can pretend that he's Irish and you can practice your Irish accent while you're watching your Jaguars games over the weekend.
Perfect.
Buffalo at Miami, the Bills by 3.5. It's an over-under of 48. Whether to start Josh Allen is not really a question if you drafted him. The good news for you as a Josh Allen owner is that last year he threw 7 touchdown passes across basically a game and a half of action against Miami, which played solid defense last year. So it's a potential get-right spot for Josh Allen this week.
Yeah, these Buffalo has put up a ton of points versus Miami in the past couple of years. And these games in general have turned out to be higher scoring. This year it's only through 1 week, obviously, but both these teams are top 5 in situation neutral pace. So they both played fast in week 1. So I kind of like this game as a shootout. I like the over 48 points.
Mm-hmm. Stephon Diggs obviously never comes out of fantasy lineups. Cole Beasley, 13 targets, matched Stephon Diggs in week 1, about 25% of Josh Allen's attempts. So it's pretty easy to start him this week as well. And there's also some stuff to like about Emmanuel Sanders coming out of week 1, right?
Yeah, Beasley was 11th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points. He's going to turn out to be such a massive value. He's going wide receiver 60 in drafts. He's probably going to finish as a top 40 PPR wide receiver.
But did the expected fantasy points factor in vaccine status?
They don't, but we're going to work that in to the model going forward.
All right.
Yeah. Sanders had impressive usage, and I know Josh Allen missed him for what would have been, or what could have been, a long touchdown in that game. So, the box score could have been even better, but, ran a route on 94% of the pass plays, on a pass heavy team, 16% target share for Sanders. He was 6th among all wide receivers in air yards. So, Gabriel Davis scored another touchdown. That's just what he does. But, he still is the clear 4th wide receiver on this team. It's Diggs, Beasley, and Sanders as, kind of basically on the field for every pass play for Buffalo.
Yeah, Gabe Davis is going to have a nice game here and there, but he's going to frustrate you more than he's not if you try to own him and decide when to start him.
So
Dawson No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say with Davis, he was on the field a ton in week 1, or not a ton, but a lot. He ran her out on 60% of the pass plays. The Bills had 4 wide receivers on the field for 45% of their snaps in week 1, which is insane. They were one of the heaviest teams in 4 wide receivers sets last year, and they were at 16%. So we'll see how high they stay this season. I don't think it's going to be 45%, but that's at least good news for Davis. He's probably going to pay off for like your best ball teams, but season long, his floor is just so low. I would never want to start him without an injury to one of these top 3 guys.
Yeah, best ball is the time for him unless Emmanuel Sanders goes down. And all those 4 wide receiver sets helped Dawson Knox remain quiet in week 1, but he was efficient. So he's not on the main starter radar, but at least played well.
Yeah, just 45% of the pass routes for Dawson Knox, 8% target share. So, he's going to need those to come way up to be someone we can trust.
I guess the biggest question for Buffalo might be whether Zach Moss plays at all in week 2. And maybe, I guess it's not the biggest question because even if he plays, he's not going to do a whole lot. It's not a backfield to count on heavily. Devin Singletary had a nice game against Pittsburgh, and even he just had 11 carries, 72 yards, 3 catches for 8 more.
Yeah, 11 carries and 5 targets up for Singletary. That's fantasy starter worthy. It was obviously a tough matchup against Pittsburgh in week 1, easier this week against Miami. So we'll see. If Moss is a healthy scratch again, I'd feel comfortable using Singletary in fantasy lineups. It becomes a bit shakier if Moss is active. I'd still expect Singletary to lead the way, but Moss probably, because Matt Breida was active, but he was not hardly involved in the offense at all. So we'll see on Sunday morning if Moss is up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so even with no Zach Moss, Devin Singletary is more Naheem Hines than he is Jonathan Taylor.
Yes.
On the Miami side, Tua was just okay against New England last week, and along with him, Devontae Parker and Jalen Waddle were just okay. Now they get Will Fuller back from his suspension. What are you doing with the Miami passing game in this one? Because this is I don't know if it's a tougher matchup or a similar matchup for the passing game than the Patriots are.
I think it's similar. Maybe easier. I don't know. I think Patriots defense might end up being tougher on quarterbacks than Buffalo's. We'll see. I think getting Will Fuller is going to be huge for Tua, and now he has those 3 strong wide receivers. Kind of one of the reasons we liked him this summer. It'd still be a wait and see situation for me if possible, but I definitely like Tua more this week than I did last week.
Okay. Mike Gesicki is somebody to not like more this week than he did last week because he saw disappointing usage, 60% route rate. He tied Albert Wilson in that category, just 3 routes ahead of Durham Smythe, which is probably even worse considering they're both tight ends, I guess. The best hope, I think, is that Mike Gesicki remains inconsistent because the other side of that is that he now is consistently being used less. That would certainly be worse than if he's just unpredictable.
Yeah, Gesicki's a guy I'd try to keep on fantasy rosters at least another week or 2 just to see what happens to this usage. Because, like you said, the 60% route rate, he only saw 2 targets, and that was without Will Fuller. So, what happens when Miami gets that strong 3rd wide receiver in the mix now, too. So, Gesicki, definitely someone I would try to bench this week.
Mm-hmm. Backfield, there were touches for all three as expected. Myles Gaskin was probably, I don't know, I guess he's the nominal leader as we expected. I don't know, was it the level that you expected it at? Was it more? Was it less?
About what I expected, I guess. I mean, 9 carries for Gaskin, 8 total for Malcolm Brown and Salvon Ahmed. You know, Gaskin was the leader in the passing game, which is, I think, is what you were hoping for if you drafted him. He saw 5 targets. He ran a pass route on 57% of the pass plays. So that he has that going for him. Now, it's another case where, like, now that Will Fuller's back, like, does that take some of Gaskin's passing game volume away? To me, he's an RB3. With more value in PPR, but I mean, it's definitely still a 3-headed backfield.
Yeah, he looks similar to Chase Edmonds for me. There's not a lot of upside, but if you need a running back and you're looking in that range, Myles Gaskin's okay.
Yep.
Anything else from that game?
That's it.
Houston at Cleveland, the Browns by 12.5, over under 48. Vegas obviously not impressed by what the Texans did at home to the Jaguars last week. Texans did surprise in that game, but now they get a Cleveland team that almost went to Kansas City and won. I'm not playing any Houston player besides Brandon Cooks.
Yes, I'm with you there. I mean, it's interesting too. I mean, I remember we said on the show last week that, Houston had the 21-point implied total. And I think I said, like, I'd definitely take the under there, which they obviously smashed the over. This week they're down at 17.75. So, Vegas is not as optimistic as they were last week, even about Houston. Yeah, I'm with you. Brandon Cooks, the only play. Encouraging opener for him, obviously. 5 catches, 132 yards. Saw 21% target share. Cooks was 8th among all wide receivers in air yards. Tyrod Taylor actually looked really good. Like, I would not want to use him outside of 2 quarterback superflex leagues, but he actually played well, gave us the rushing, which to me is just good news for Brandon Cooks. Like, he's a guy I think you can use as a weekly wide receiver 3.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I mean, is there anything? I know that lots of people picked up Mark Ingram this week.
Yeah.
If you did, I mean, I guess you probably have to use him. It really depends on what else you have. But I wouldn't have been shopping for Mark Ingram this week, so I don't know if I can reasonably break that one down.
I mean, I would still try not to use him. I mean, he benefited because Houston played with the lead that entire game, and he is their early down grinder back. But they still used 4 running backs. Mark Ingram played 46% of the snaps. David Johnson 28%. Philip Lindsay 26%. Rex Burkhead 13%. So it's 4-headed backfield, and what I still think is going to be a bad offense. They're going to be playing from behind. It'll be nice. Hopefully we get to see Houston play from behind this game to kind of see what the backfield looks like in that case. We know what it's going to look like when they're ahead. It's Ingram, but I just don't think they're going to be ahead much this season.
And shockingly, there were fantasy points for all 3 of those top 3 Houston running backs last week. That's probably never going to happen again this season.
No.
On the Cleveland side, you're playing anyone in consideration. If you have Kareem Hunt, you love that he scored in week 1, especially if he did so in your lineup, but don't lose sight of his usage. 6 carries versus Nick Chubb's 15 in a game that they were leading almost the entire way. 3 targets versus 2 for Chubb. It was Hunt well ahead of Chubb in terms of routes. He tied David Njoku for 4th on the team in routes and nearly doubled Nick Chubb in that category. But still, I mean, 9 total opportunities for him. That's just, he's not going to score a touchdown most weeks. He will some weeks because he's involved in all the phases, but it's not going to happen a lot.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, this probably isn't even a week you're going to get a lot of passing game volume out of Kareem Hunt if the game goes how we think it's going to be with Cleveland winning pretty easily. But I do think like these running backs could combine for 35 carries, and you might get 12 to 13, 14 carries out of Kareem Hunt. So that volume in this matchup, he's definitely an RB3 with upside this week. So if you're not using Hunt this week, like he's just a handcuff to you. You're not going to use him in any matchup.
Yes, I agree with that. If you drafted him, he probably should play this week because you were drafting him in round 5 or 6. And this is a matchup that he should be able to capitalize. I mentioned he did tie David Njoku for 4th on the team in routes. That was ahead of Austin Hooper. Mm-hmm. Njoku played just 3 fewer total snaps than Hooper, ran 2 more routes. So, I mean, that complicates the view. The good thing for that whole situation is the same thing as it is for Kareem Hunt. This is a matchup where anybody could do whatever in this game because Cleveland is probably going to move the ball and score at will. So any chance that you're considering taking among Browns this week, it's a fine spot to take those chances.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm intrigued by Njoku, and he still ran a route on only 48% of Cleveland's pass plays in week 1. So that's still kind of, well below what we want. But but he saw the 5 targets. He saw a few downfield targets. He was actually second among tight ends in air yards in week 1. So he still needs to get a bigger share of the pass plays to be someone we can count on. But I mean, for this week, it's already ugly at tight end behind the top like 7 or 8 guys. So there's upside to Njoku this week just because Cleveland should score 30 plus points.
Mm-hmm. And it's easy to say that he's flashed before, we've fallen for it before, we're not going to fall for it again. He's still just 25. I mean, it's not like he's been in the league forever. So there's room for David Njoku to become a thing still. And it's, I think, noteworthy that Cleveland did not trade him away this offseason. So clearly they still like him to some degree.
Yep.
Odell Beckham Jr., speaking of people we probably don't like as fantasy players right now, has already been ruled out for week 2. So the knee's an issue. That leaves Anthony Schwartz, Donovan Peoples-Jones still heavily involved. Anthony Schwartz tied Jarvis Landry and David Njoku for the week 1 target lead with 5 targets apiece.
Yeah, I mean, Schwartz was definitely part of the game plan. I mean, his playing time was well behind Donovan Peoples-Jones. It was Landry and Peoples-Jones as Cleveland's top 2 wide receivers. Schwartz is the number 3, but the 5 targets he carried, he had 1 carry. Schwartz did. He's like a DFS flyer still. Kind of same deal with Donovan Peoples-Jones. But interesting that Cleveland was definitely designing stuff to get the ball in his hands.
Yeah, I mean, it raised eyebrows when they drafted Anthony Schwartz in round 3. Obviously, they like him and they want to capitalize on his speed, but definitely don't lose sight of the fact that Donovan Peoples-Jones ran 50% more routes than Schwartz in week 1. 2 total routes short of Jarvis Landry's team lead was DPJ. I wouldn't really be considering either one for a redraft lineup in nearly all cases, but they're both players to kind of watch the usage going forward.
Definitely. Jarvis Landry going to be the clear top receiver here again with Beckham out. So Landry's a strong fantasy play this week. And, Baker Mayfield, no Beckham hurts again. And he's probably not going to have big pass volume here if, Cleveland plays with a big lead. But I do think you could see Baker throw, 2-3 touchdowns pretty easily. So he's a fine week 2 spot starter.
Yeah, I agree. If you're deciding between Baker Mayfield and somebody else down in QB2 type range, he looks like a higher floor guy to me this week.
Yeah. Like I would start Baker over Tua, even though Tua probably throws it 15 more times. I just think Baker's a better touchdown bet.
Yes, I agree with that. On to Cincinnati at Chicago. The Bears by 1 at home. That's down from 3 at the open, over under 45. I don't think this is a game that we should get excited about on the fantasy front, but week 1 gave us highlights from Cincinnati, the 50-yard touchdown to Jamar Chase. We also got touchdowns from T. Higgins, from Joe Mixon, who had the big rushing day. Mixon, obviously a weekly starter until he proves otherwise to us. I do think that there's a little bit of reason for hesitation on the Cincinnati passing game, though. I did the fantasy vision for this one. By the way, if you're new to Draft Sharks, we do fantasy visions every week where we have somebody watching every single game, writing up what we see from fantasy relevant players on both sides of that game. We post those with the rest of the season rankings on Wednesday every week. So definitely check those out. Lots of good little nuggets that you can get from those. But on the Cincinnati passing game, the Bengals were the most run-heavy team in neutral situations in the entire league in week 1. It was something like 32% pass on those, early down situations. Joe Burrow graded out just 19th in passing. That's not a killer, but it's not great either. He also led the entire league in the percentage of pressures that turned into sacks. So the Bengals only ranked 13th in pressure rate, but the pressures were becoming sacks. When you combine that with just 1 carry for 2 yards for Joe Burrow and just what we've seen in the limited action since he came back from the knee injury, we should expect that the rushing is not going to be there like we hoped it would be last year and that the mobility is going to be limited versus as usual.
Yeah, at least early on this season. We'll see if it gets better over the course of the year. Burrow's still outside our top 12 quarterbacks this week. He probably will be for a while. It's so funny that everyone loved Burrow, at least early in the summer, because they thought Cincinnati was going to be so pass heavy and they were going to be such a fast paced offense. They were middle of the pack in pace in week 1, but like you said, the run heaviest team, versus expectation. And that's definitely because they have this, young quarterback coming off a multi-ligament knee injury behind a bad O-line. Like they're going to protect him with Joe Mixon, who's a stud, who we told you to draft all summer. Hopefully you did, because he's a workhorse. Now, Chicago is dead last in Football Outsiders defensive DVOA through week 1. They did not look good against the Rams in the opener. So that helps the matchup. I think Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, you're starting for sure. Tyler Boyd was quiet in the opener, only 4 targets. He was still out there. He was still a full-time player. I think he's gonna have his games. But Boyd already looks like the number 3 wide receiver on this team. And that's, it could be an issue when they're not as pass heavy as, we thought they were going to be.
Yeah, I would play Jamar Chase and T. Higgins this week, high in wide receiver 3 range. But I would be holding off on Joe Burrow and Tyler Boyd because Boyd needs that target volume more than Chase or Higgins. And I don't expect this to be shootout conditions like it was Minnesota versus Cincinnati. So we'll see. Obviously, Cincinnati's coming up some, at least, in pass rate versus week 1, just because no team does that kind of rate for an entire season. But if they're going to try to stay toward the bottom of the league in that category, it's definitely going to hurt Tyler Boyd.
Yep, good point.
On the Chicago side, the Bengals D should be worse than the Rams, but week 1 did not give me any reason to reach beyond Allen Robinson or David Montgomery in the Chicago offensive lineup.
Do we know Andy Dalton starting this game? Is it made official? I'm still holding out hope maybe Fields.
I haven't heard an announcement, but I cannot imagine Matt Nagy already being like, okay, guys, you were all right. I'm going to bench Andy Dalton in week 2.
Yes, I mean, if you watch this game, you know Dalton's average depth of throw was low. Like there was just nothing downfield. It was 4.5 yards, his average depth of throw. That was 31st on the week. It was actually Jalen Hurts at 32nd in average depth of throw. But I mean, it's just like Allen Robinson had the targets, 11 targets, 28% target share, but a 4.3 yard average depth of target. Like we're not going to see the ceiling on A-Rob until Fields gets in there. Hopefully the Bengals somehow smash Chicago here, and that gets us Fields in week 3.
Yeah. I think Teddy Bridgewater watched this game and was chuckling at Andy Dalton's ADOT. So we also got 7 targets apiece for Cole Kmet and Darnell Mooney in the opener. Again, I'm going to need Justin Fields before I'm playing Darnell Mooney. I do think Cole Kmet is in play like down in tight end 2 territory, especially against the Bengals. But, it's not a situation to get excited about anything until we get Justin Fields.
Yeah, Cole Kmet's usage was encouraging. 71% of the routes versus just 20 for Jimmy Graham. So, if you were worried about Graham stealing stuff from Kmet, that's not really an issue going forward. Kmet was out wide or in the slot for 43% of his snaps in week 1. That was up from 32% last year. So, he's getting more of that wide receiver work. So, yeah, Kmet's definitely a guy, once Fields takes over, he could work his way into like low end tight end 1 territory.
Pretty sweet gig for Jimmy Graham now, still making all that money and not having to play nearly as much football. He's off in the corner office with just busy work now, I think.
Totally, yep.
San Francisco at Philadelphia next up. The Niners by 3 in this game, over under 50. And I honestly think Vegas just has this one wrong. Both of these teams performed well in week 1. The Niners ranked 3rd in offensive DVOA, according to Football Outsiders. The Eagles checked in 9th in that category. Philly was 4th in defensive DVOA. The Niners 13th there. So combine them, and the Eagles were 3rd in overall team DVOA, Niners 5th. So, I mean, let's call that even. If we call them even, how does the road team enter Philadelphia as a 3-point favorite? Doesn't make any sense to me.
No, I'm going to bet Philly. I'm going to put some money on Philly plus the points here. I agree. I think I'd make this line like a pick 'em or 1 point either way. So getting the full field goal on Philly, I like that bet.
Yeah, I mean, usually if it's even, then it's a 3-point line in favor of the home team. But and the other thing, too, is if you point to any of the soft spots for Philly, they're the exact same soft spots on the other side and probably softer. I mean, Jalen Hurts is going to falter. Jimmy Garoppolo is certainly capable of faltering. Are you worried about the Philly secondary? The San Francisco secondary is even worse than Philly's. It's a goofy line to me. So we'll move on to the fantasy impact of all that. I think on the Niners side, obviously, Elijah Mitchell was the big fantasy story of this week. You having to pay, 178% of your fab budget to get him off of waivers. I think if you got Elijah Mitchell in your bidding this week, you pretty much have to start him. Now, I think that depends a little bit on whether you went to get him because you want him to be one of your starting running backs, or whether you did kind of a defensive bid and you just won because the people in your league didn't bid nearly as much. Because it looks like there was a lot of difference between like high stakes leagues and, big money leagues and your more average fantasy leagues where his price was a lot more reasonable this week.
Yeah, I mean, if you got him in a high stakes league, hopefully you're starting him because I'm sure you paid 70+% of your fab on him. We have Mitchell ranked as like an RB3 this week. His range of outcomes is massive. Like he could finish as a lower end RB1. He could get 8 to 10 carries and hurt you. I went back and watched all of his carries against the Lions. I thought he looked good. not great. I mean, he's out. He's fast. He has good bursts. He's similar to Raheem Mostert. You know, they're similar players. I think, and I've seen multiple 49ers beat writers suggest that Mitchell's just going to kind of take over the Mostert role in this backfield as, like, you know, the lightning. Who the Thunder is going to be, we'll see. Kyle Shanahan already said that Trey Sermon will be active for this game, so he's going to be there. We'll see whether he is ahead of Mitchell, which I doubt, whether he's ahead of JaMychal Hasty. They just signed Trenton Cannon to the active roster. So, you know, Mitchell's the only one I would want to use in fantasy lineups. Sermon definitely should, like, if there's any chance Sermon was dropped in your league, I would definitely grab him, because I still think at worst he's going to be the 1B in this backfield. And I mean, it's a fluid situation. Sermon could still end up playing a big role throughout the season.
Clearly, every single person was wrong about Elijah Mitchell to some degree. But the reason that I didn't really like him as a prospect, and obviously the NFL didn't either, he went to the 6th round, is that he was a complimentary back in college at Louisiana. And not complimentary, but he was a split backfield guy. And the thunder to his lightning at Louisiana was Trey Ragas, who is now on an NFL practice squad. It's not like he was being marginalized by somebody who was really good. So Elijah Mitchell, anybody who's getting significant carries in the San Francisco backfield is worth owning and using in fantasy. So there's definitely plenty of upside to Elijah Mitchell the rest of the way, but I would not bet on him being, you know, a clear lead back, definitely not workhorse level. And I would worry about the usage, especially because he wasn't involved in the passing game in week 1.
Yes, I was going to say, so two things. I mean, if he gets 12 to 15 carries per game, like, he's going to be efficient in this running game, and he's going to help you. But like you said, he wasn't involved in the passing game. He ran a route on just 36% of the pass plays. And JaMychal Hasty got San Francisco's only carry inside the 5-yard line. And, you know, going back to what you said about Mitchell being a complimentary guy, you know, he's only like 200 pounds. He's a smaller guy. Hasty's not even a big guy, but, you know, he got the goal line carry over Elijah Mitchell. So, you know, that, to me, that screams Trey Sermon, who is a big guy. Like, he, I think, has a good chance to at least get the goal line work. But I mean, you know, Mitchell might just end up being a guy who gets, you know, 12, 13 carries a game, doesn't do a lot in the passing game, and doesn't have big touchdown upside. So, I mean, we'll see. Hopefully we should know more after Sunday.
I think the one thing that we know about this backfield is it's going to be frustrating. We expected that coming into the season, and even with Raheem Mostert going down, it's still going to be frustrating. To me, it looks like JaMychal Hasty might be like their version of Brandon Bolden, where he's just always hanging around in New England. He's never quite good enough to do a lot, but he's just good enough that the coach wants to keep him around to just kind of fill in any gaps that they have. I would bet that Trey Sermon is going to work easily ahead of JaMychal Hasty, even if it's not immediately this week going forward. But, you know, we'll see. Certainly none of us were betting that Elijah Mitchell was going to be the week 1 breakthrough guy.
Yeah, and the Niners also signed Kerryon Johnson to the practice squad, and they're going to get Jeff Wilson back from the PUP list in week 7. It sounds like he'll be ready then. So, I mean, there's still a lot of bodies in this backfield.
Right. Elsewhere in that offense, Brandon Ayuk was the other thing in week 1, and there's not even an injury to explain that one. So, well, I mean, I guess there was an injury, the hamstring, which Kyle Shanahan mentions. And the way that he talks about it, it sounds to me like he's frustrated that Brandon Ayuk has not made it back from what he originally called a minor hamstring injury. And he's kind of, I don't know if punishing, I guess disciplining him a little bit for that.
It also really sounds like Shanahan and like the Niners quarterbacks like Trent Sherfield, which, you know, sounds crazy, but he just sounds like that reliable guy who's kind of like in the space he's supposed to be at all times. You know, that's what Shanahan has said all week, that, like, you know, Ayuk he needs to beat out Trent Sherfield, which sounds crazy. I mean, there were also some Niners beat writers saying that, like, Ayuk's performance in training camp tailed off even before the hamstring injury. You know, none of this went reported during August, which is crazy with all the NFL coverage we have. I mean, ultimately, I still think Ayuk is going to become something close to a full-time player in this offense. You know, he probably won't surpass Deebo Samuel as the top option. But I mean, until we see Ayuk get up to like 70-80% of the snaps, I don't see how you can use him in fantasy lineups.
If you didn't report something like that in the summer, then don't report it after the fact to us, please. It doesn't do us any good if you say, yeah, we saw him tailing off in the summer. That just makes us angry. It's not helpful.
Agreed.
Trey Lance played 4 snaps in the opener. We were worried about him kind of cherry picking the red zone stuff, and that was where he made his first appearance. But he's also not an auto replace in that area of the field, because the second time that the Niners got down to the red zone, Jimmy Garoppolo stayed in there. So that was the only other time they got there. We don't really know how it's going to break down yet. We did see Trey Lance one other time. Again, 4 total snaps, so not a big role. And Jimmy Garoppolo still managed to throw for over 300 yards on less than 30 pass attempts.
He did. I mean, against a bad Lions pass defense. I mean, to me, Garoppolo was a low-end quarterback too. If we didn't have to worry about Trey Lance stealing red zone stuff, so Garoppolo is just not a guy I want to have to mess with. I
agree. Anything else on the Niners side?
Nope.
Philly side, I'm comfortably starting Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith, and Miles Sanders this week. I think Dallas Goedert's still in the same territory where he was late in draft season, which is low tight end 1 territory. It was a fine opener for him, but there were a lot of tight ends around the league that beat him in target share beyond the obvious guys at the top of the position. I laid out the whole list in my fantasy vision, but it included guys like Jared Cook for the Chargers and James O'Shaughnessy for the Jaguars.
Was that supposed to be your Irish accent?
Yeah, just a quick one.
So the only thing with Goddard is, Zach Ertz, he missed some time in that game with a hamstring, but he came back. Ertz did. But he didn't practice on Wednesday, so keep an eye on that. If Ertz is out, then Goddard should be something close to a full-time player. Then you're talking about like a top 8 tight end. Otherwise, he's a low-end tight end 1. I'm with you on Jalen Hurts. I thought he looked excellent in the opener as a passer. Even again, he had the low ADOT. It was a lot of short stuff, but he did what he had to do on the short stuff. He was second among all quarterbacks in PFF's passing grade in week 1. He was first in adjusted completion percentage. And then he still gave you the rushing, 7 carries for 62 yards. Hurts has now finished as a top 12 fantasy quarterback in all 4 of his full games, the 3 last year. And then he was, quarterback 5 in week 1 this year. So, he's locked in as a quarterback 1 going forward, I think.
Yeah, a lot of short stuff in that one. I would imagine that they won't stay quite as short, because I would think that defenses adjust to that and start playing it. But they are also set up with lots of speed at wideout to be able to capitalize on the short passes and room to run after the catch. To that end, it was nice to have Jalen Reagor score a touchdown and catch all 6 of his passes in week 1, but he basically had Deebo Samuel's ADOT from last year in week 1. His touchdown, his 20-plus yard touchdown, came on a catch in the backfield that he took the entire way to the end zone. So a nice start, but I'm going to need to see a little more before I'm using him. And then Quez Watkins got the ball on their first 3 offensive plays and then not again the rest of the game.
I was so excited. I took Quez Watkins in like the 18th round of a bunch of underdog drafts. I was like, here we go, baby. Quez Watkins, number 1 receiver for Philly. Watkins ended up rotating with Greg Ward and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. He's not a fantasy option. I'm with you on Reagor. Like, he's still a wait-and-see guy for me. He only played 70% of the snaps, which it's not a horrible number, but he wasn't a full-time player. He's still a bench guy. And then Devontae Smith already looks like Philly's top receiver.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, Zach Ertz ran an awesome pick route on Devontae Smith's touchdown where he ran right at the defender and then pulled up before making any contact, so he couldn't get flagged for the penalty. It was amazing. Yeah.
That's why you don't trade Zach Ertz, the veteran savvy.
That's right. New Orleans at Carolina next up. Saints by 3.5, over under 45 points. A nice debut for Jameis Winston as the starter for the Saints, but I'm going to need something besides a super fluky passing line before I'm thinking about using him in a fantasy lineup outside of a 2 QB league. 14 of 20 passing, 148 yards, 5 touchdowns, and even his rushing efficiency was completely out of line with the rest of his career.
Yeah, definitely a fluky stat line, but he looked good. Obviously to have that type of efficiency. He was 6th in PFF's passing grades for week 1. Like you said, gave us the rushing. He's still not really anywhere close to our top 12 quarterbacks. He's a mid-range quarterback 2 in our week 2 rankings. This Panthers defense, by the way, I think it might be much better than it has been recently, much better than it was last year. These teams, the Saints through 1 week are 1st in defensive DVOA and Football Outsiders, and the Panthers are 3rd. Again, it's only 1 week, but this could be a defensive battle.
Yeah, and the Panthers played better on defense over the second half of last year than they did even in the first half. And, we know this, but it's worth remembering that the whole coaching staff was new last year. So it's sensible that things got better through last year and then in year 2. So it will be something to watch. But I agree. I think the Panthers defense is usable in this game. I think it's a game that might not feature a whole lot of points. It's a game where I'm probably not reaching too far for fantasy options. And speaking of reaching, Marquez Callaway probably left you feeling like an idiot if you played him in week 1, but at least a large chunk of it was the game going in a goofy way that none of us really could have predicted. I mean, we mentioned the passing numbers for Winston. The Saints only attempted 21 passes for the game. Callaway ran a route on 92% of Jameis Winston's dropbacks that led the team. So he had the role that we expected. There just were no targets there.
Yep, that's exactly right. I mean, it's tough for a receiver when your team only throws 21 passes. Callaway also had the Jair Alexander matchup for at least some of his snaps. So he looks the same to me as he did heading into week 1. And it's nice to see Jameis play so well. That can only help Callaway. So, he's like a wide receiver 4. If you need him in deeper leagues as a wide receiver 3, he's okay. Callaway still looks like the Saints' clear number 1 wide receiver.
I haven't checked his price on the DFS sites yet, so I'll be curious to see that ahead of tomorrow's shows. The target leaders for the Saints, by the way, Adam Troutman at 6, Alvin Kamara at 4, and Juwan Johnson at 3. So it took 3 targets to rank 3rd on the team in that category. The takeaway from that list, by the way, is don't quit on Adam Troutman just because Juwan Johnson was the guy who lucked into a pair of touchdowns.
Yeah, Troutman is the Saints' top tight end. Like, if they're available on your waiver wire, Troutman is the guy you want. He ran around on 75% of pass plays. Juwan Johnson was only at 42%. Like you said, Troutman doubled up Juwan Johnson 6-3 in targets. And Johnson obviously did get both of the targets inside the 10-yard line. Troutman didn't see any of those. But that could be just a fluke one-off thing. Troutman, definitely usage-wise is the top guy there.
Are they going to be Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron from the Colts of a few years ago?
Who's Ebron?
I mean, the guy who scored 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Could be. Yeah, could be.
Yeah, it's where Jack Doyle was the lead receiver in terms of volume, and then Eric Ebron came on to score 11 touchdowns, I think, that season.
Yeah, could be.
On the Carolina side of this game, I'm not playing Sam Darnold this week unless I punted on quarterback in the draft and, really wait until the end and I'm looking low in QB2 range. I still think I would play him over Jameis Winston this week because his receivers are light years ahead of what Jameis Winston's are. I'm not reaching over steadier options, but I feel better about Sam Darnold plus, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Christian McCaffrey, Terrace Marshall than I do about Winston and his crew.
Yeah, I'd probably start Darnold between those 2 as well. So we'll have to flip those in the rankings the more I looked into this. So Darnold played well enough in the opener. He completed 69% of his passes, didn't turn the ball over. A lot of it was short stuff to McCaffrey and DJ Moore. That's the benefit of playing with these guys. The other nice thing for Darnold, Carolina was 3rd in situation neutral pass rate in week 1. So it was a pass leaning offense, which makes sense. Like, you have 3 awesome receivers. You have the best pass catching back in the NFL. Like, they should be a pass leaning offense. Encouraging debut for Darnold. I think he gets the Saints without top cornerback Marshawn Lattimore in this game. So it's, again, the Saints were 1st in defensive DVOA, but if you look at the secondary, there's nothing really to worry about there, I don't think. Darnold, not a top 12 guy, but a nice 2 quarterback league play and maybe a spot starter in deeper leagues.
Mm-hmm. And it's worth noting, by the way, we've mentioned DVOA a few times, but there's not really a D in DVOA yet because there's nothing to adjust the defensive matchups for. It's still definitely a stat worth quoting. I'm going to overlook Robbie Anderson's quiet week 1 because the usage was there. Terrace Marshall might have been slightly more involved than we expected, but otherwise it really looked like at the top of the wide receiver depth chart what we expected things to look like for the Panthers, that Robbie Anderson right with DJ Moore in terms of role.
Yeah, I thought the playing time was exactly like we expected. DJ Moore ran her out on 92% of the pass plays. Robbie Anderson was at 89%. That's 65%. It was, Anderson just got the 3 targets, 9% target share. He's probably going to have more games like that this season just because there are 2 other quality wide receivers and Christian McCaffrey, who Carolina just wants to get him 30 touches a game, evidently. But I also think Anderson's still going to have games where he gets 7 or 8 targets. He still looks good, obviously, on the long touchdown. He's a boomer bust wide receiver 3. Most wide receiver 3s are boomer bust. I still think Anderson, I'd still start him this week. We'll see if he has another low volume game. It'll be time to worry.
How many wide receivers are not boomer bust besides Keenan Allen? Dan Arnold, by the way, ran as many pass routes as Christian McCaffrey in week 1. So a usable guy at some level. Again, it all depends on the kind of league that you're playing in and how far down you're looking. I'm certainly not touting Dan Arnold, but worth knowing how much he played in that one. You already mentioned Marshawn Lattimore being out probably this week following thumb surgery. That certainly helps the matchup for the whole passing game on the Carolina side. Anything else from that game?
No, I just wanted to say, this I did this game for FV's for Fantasy Vision, so I rewatched it. Terrace Marshall came close to having a bigger game. He had a couple just misses. There was a back shoulder throw that would have gone for like 20 yards that he just couldn't come up with. He had 2 of Carolina's 6 red zone targets, including one where he was open and Sam Darnold sailed it over his head. So it was an encouraging game for Marshall. I still think he's going to pop for some big games this season.
Yeah, I agree with that. You're going to have to, be ready for volatility. Know going in that there's a low floor to it, but there's definitely a ceiling as well.
Yep.
Rams at Colts. Rams by 3.5 on the road, 47.5 over under. I'm using all the main players on the LA side: Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and feeling pretty good about the way things started for Tyler Higbee.
Oh yeah, man. Higbee played every single snap, ran a route on 93% of the pass plays. He was at 54% of the pass routes last year. That's why he was a disappointment. If he's up around 90, like he could be in the mix with Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts. I think Hawkinson has kind of ascended into the next tier to me. We can talk about him, but Higbee's going to be a big value based on where you got him at ADP.
Hawkinson was already up in that tier for me heading into the season. So really week 1 was just confirmation. I agree. I like where things are going with Higbee. Feeling good about him right now on teams where I have him. Darrell Henderson also dominated week 1 work in that backfield. Yeah. So, that certainly has potential to change. Sony Michel has been on the team for a limited amount of time to this point. But for now, Darrell Henderson looks like a pretty solid running back too for week 2.
Yeah, I was surprised we didn't see more of Michel. And I don't know, like he's been there 3 weeks, which is not a ton of time, but it's also not like nothing. Like I thought he'd be ready for a bit more than he got in that opener. So I would still try to keep Michel stashed. Like, worst case, he's a very high-end handcuff. But, Henderson looks like a easy weekly starter at this point on his workload. And, at wide receiver, did you see Van Jefferson ran more pass routes than Robert Woods?
I did not see that, actually.
Yeah. Cooper Kupp was at 100%. He was like one of 5 guys in the NFL to run a route on 100% of pass play. So he's good to go. Dan Jefferson was at 86%, Robert Woods at 68%, and then Deshaun Jackson was at 36%. I don't know. I think Sean McVay does like game plan stuff more than a lot of coaches. But worst case, Jefferson is clearly ahead of Djax as the third guy. We'll see. I'd be surprised if he ends up running more pass routes than Robert Woods, but definitely something to watch in week 2.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that we also saw at times with Josh Reynolds versus Cooper Kupp a couple of years ago. I think sometimes, Sean McVay obviously knows a lot more about football and offense than I do. I think he also outsmarts himself at times. So we'll see. I'm not going to expect that Van Jefferson stays ahead of Robert Woods in playing time, which is probably why I didn't even bother looking it up. My takeaway from watching the game was Van Jefferson is clearly ahead of Deshaun Jackson, and that's what helps him be a factor.
Yeah, my other takeaway is this offense is going to be awesome with Matt Stafford. Like they put up the numbers they did. They only ran 50 plays in that game. I think that was the lowest of the week. Like, they're going to run 65 plays most games. So the Rams offense, you want pieces of it.
Yeah, it was kind of an odd game. I'm also keeping Michel stashed. I paid up for him on preseason waivers in our main event league. And I would throw in that last year at this time, we were all like, wow, I guess Malcolm Brown is the lead back for the Rams. So it's worth noting in all cases that we're 1 week in.
Yeah. I would have liked to have seen him do a bit more, but I don't know, maybe he's just not ready yet.
I sure would have as well. So we'll see what happens going forward. On the Colts side, it went fine. I'm still not excited about anyone, and it's a tougher matchup this week against the Rams defense than it was week 1 against the Seahawks defense. So I would say I'm more willing right now to use Nyheim Hines than I was this time last week, and it should be a good matchup for him and a threatening pass rush from the Rams plus a meh set of off-the-ball linebackers.
Yeah, I thought Phillip Rivers was gone from Indy and there was a new quarterback, but it was still a ton of passes to the running backs in week 1. 8 targets for Nyheim Hines, 7 targets for Jonathan Taylor. It was a 39% target share combined for the running backs, which is, like double the NFL average. We'll see if that continues to be the case. We know Indy's wide receivers are on the weaker side. The tight ends aren't exciting. So maybe, JT and Hines are going to remain a big part of the passing game. But I don't know. I guess I'm still in wait and see mode on Jonathan Taylor because, he still only played 55% of the snaps. He only ran a route on 40. Like he saw 7 targets despite only running a route on 40% of the pass plays. Like, it's tough to expect that to continue. But we'll see. I mean, I think the takeaway is that Hines is going to continue to be a pretty big part of this offense.
Especially coming off the contract extension that he signed just before the season. It's clear that they want him to be a significant part. There was encouraging usage for Michael Pittman and Zach Pascal in week 1. The results were fine. Nothing that gets you excited for week 2. My biggest takeaway from Colts receivers from week 1, though, is that Paris Campbell remains a guy that I'm just not at all interested in. I just don't see it.
Yeah, Paris Campbell, you can drop him because he's the clear number 3 wide receiver even before T.Y. Hilton comes back. So that, there's no reason to be carrying Paris Campbell. I don't think.
Las Vegas at Pittsburgh. Steelers by 5.5 at home, over under 47. It was a nice debut for Derek Carr, of course. He was tops in our expected fantasy points rankings for week 1. That said, I'm still not using him in Pittsburgh against the Steelers defense that just shut down Josh Allen.
Yeah, I mean, 56 passes for Derek Carr. The Raiders ran 80 plays. That's kind of how he got to where he did. Vegas was 5th in situation neutral pass rate in week 1, which is a major surprise. Like, you expected them to be a run leaning offense. We'll see if that continues. Carr lost guard Denzel Good for the season in week 1. Richie Incognito, his other guard, might not play in this game, and he's facing Steelers defense that just kind of shut down Josh Allen and the Bills. So Carr is not someone I'd want to be using this week.
And, we have our expectations for what a team is going to look like, but I think it's encouraging to see the Raiders attack that game in the way that they should have. The Ravens lost Marcus Peters shortly before week 1. They had other injuries in the secondary. I mean, they were depleted in the defensive backfield. So Vegas should have been trying to attack them in that range. So it was good to see them doing that.
It's not like it's not like Carr was throwing to his wide receivers much, though.
Right.
It was Waller.
Right. Well, I guess when your tight end is that size, it's tough to see some of the smaller guys that you have as receivers. And frankly, if I was like, let's see, should I throw the ball toward Henry Ruggs or Darren Waller? I can't fault the guy for throwing 30 targets at Darren Waller. And that being said, Darren Waller and absolutely nobody else for the Raiders this week, if I can help it.
Yep, agreed. I mean, man, Bryan Edwards, just a funky game, obviously, had nothing through. Shout out to my buddy Nate, by the way, who had the over-under 3.5 catches for Edwards. He had 0 through like 59.5 minutes, and the over ended up hitting. Edwards caught for a ball. So that was cool. Edwards did lead the Raiders wide receivers in pass routes, but it was still just 66%. They were rotating 4 guys. Zay Jones is rotating in as well. So Edwards looks good to me, but until we see the usage improve, you can't use him in fantasy lineups. And Henry Ruggs, I just continue to think he's a bust.
I think that we have all wasted money on something, like a significant amount, that we just think back and shake our heads. I imagine that every day that Henry Ruggs comes into work, John Gruden and Mike Mayock are like, God, you could be CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy right now. What was I thinking?
Or Justin Jefferson.
Anything. At least that. Nobody was like, nobody was screaming loudly, Justin Jefferson is the number 1 wide receiver in this class. At least those other 2 people are like, seriously? It's either Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb. How are you taking Henry Ruggs? I can't. I would say I can't imagine the feeling, but I can't, because I've wasted money and I don't have nearly as much to waste as Mike Mayock or John Gruden.
Yep.
Hunter Renfrow, I think, is probably the next most interesting Raider, and just because he's going to get plenty of targets and there's nothing scary in the slot for these Steelers. I do want to say, well, actually, a couple of things before I get away from Hunter Renfrow. We had 13 targets for Cole Beasley, as I mentioned before, out of the slot for Buffalo against Pittsburgh last week. So maybe the Raiders see that and they're like, sweet, we have Cole Beasley too. I also won some money on betting the over on Renfrow's receptions in week 1. So maybe that's biasing me toward him. I want to say too, before I get away from the Raiders though, this might be an okay rushing matchup against Pittsburgh. They're missing Stephon Tuitt. He's on IR to open the season. We did already talk about how Devin Singletary gained 72 yards on just 11 carries against them. So, he kind of glanced over not wanting to start Raiders, but maybe this week's matchup looks the other way for the Raiders and they give the ball to Josh Jacobs a good bit and he ends up being a solid guy.
Yeah, that's a good point about the matchup. To me, the issue with Jacobs is he's already dealing with toe, and now he's on the injury report with an ankle injury, and he did not practice on Wednesday. So, and it looked like early in that game. I don't know if he was just getting a shoe change or if it was a toe issue, because he came out after like his first or second carry and got looked at. He ended up coming back in. Just the fact that he's already banged up like that and heading into week 2 has me worried. And then Kenyon Drake was pretty involved. 6 carries and 5 targets for Kenyon Drake. Jacobs carried 10 times and had 2 targets. So, it's already, 60, 40, 65, 35 split or whatever. So, Jacobs not a guy I'm excited about.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about the toe. And they said on the broadcast that he was wearing a shoe that had a harder bottom for it to help deal with the toe. And he was not comfy with it, so he was off for a shoe change. I don't know if it was actual reporting on it or if it was speculation on what he was doing, but yeah, either way, that's certainly something to keep in mind. So certainly not anybody I'm excited about, but if you're looking down in the range, then maybe it's not as bad a matchup as you might think with Pittsburgh. On the Steelers side, Ben Roethlisberger still needs to answer whether he still has it with his arm. They won last week, but I mean, he didn't do a whole lot in helping them do so.
Dead last in PFF's passing grades was Ben Roethlisberger, 5.9 yards per attempt. He's now been under 6 yards per attempt in 6 of his last 8 games dating back to last season. I mean, this passing game looked exactly like what we got last year. Like it was, short stuff to mostly Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster. If Ben does look 15 yards downfield, it's usually Chase Claypool. It's the same thing. Ben just might be even worse than he was for most of last season.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, I think all 3 of the top wideouts are still in play. It is a more favorable passing matchup this week than it was at Buffalo last week.
Yeah, I mean that the pass volume is still going to be there enough to keep those 3 wide receivers afloat. Even though what was it? I think Deontay went like 5 catches for 36 yards. Like it's gonna be those type of stat lines in this offense.
At least until Justin Fields takes over for Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah.
I think we have to stick with Najee Harris as well. It was a disappointing debut. Obviously, the O-line issues look for real, but you love that he played every snap, and really that's why you were drafting him. So, I mean, it's a little early to be giving up on him.
Yeah, I mean, you don't get running backs playing every single snap. I ran a route in 82% of the pass plays. I was hoping for more target volume. He only saw the 3 targets. I think that'll come up, though, again, if he's running that many pass routes. The O-line's going to be concerned. It's never going to be pretty for Najee Harris, but he still is one of the better volume bets at running back.
I've seen multiple questions already on whether to buy low on Najee Harris. There's certainly upside to that, but it's not an offense that I'm excited about. So I would not be aggressively trying to buy Najee Harris right now because it was always, some risk that Ben Roethlisberger is deteriorating and the O-line issues get in the way.
Yeah, I feel like as fantasy analysts, we're like supposed to tell people to buy low on a running back that just got that type of usage in week 1, and I think the usage is going to continue. I also think the inefficiency is going to continue. I mean, I don't know, what did he average in week 1? It was like 3 yards per carry. Like that, he's going to be a bit more efficient. He came close to scoring a couple touchdowns in that game as well. Like he's going to be fine. He's a hold for me. Like I just. I don't think he's going to smash because the O-line is so bad, but he's going to be steady because of the volume.
Right. That's where I would land too. I mean, would I go out and aggressively hunt for him on the trade desk? No. If I have somebody offering me Najee Harris for my Jamal Williams, would I take that? Yes.
Yeah. I was going to bring up that exact name, which I'd be shocked if you could get that. But if someone's just looking at the fantasy point totals, maybe you could.
Yeah, I mean, all of these things happen in some league somewhere, so it's at least worth mentioning. So Let's get away from that one and go to New England Patriots at the New York Jets this week. Patriots by 6 after it opened at 3.5 with a rookie quarterback as far as I can remember. Over under 42, it's down 1 point from where it opened, so the Jets are down from an implied total of 19.75 to 18 points. Start with the Patriots offense. It's fine. I got to say, I'm happy to mostly be on the outside of it because Damian Harris was good in week 1. I would like to have him delivered in that game. Jacoby Myers, Nelson Aguilar, Jonnu Smith, James White, they all hit usable PPR levels in week 1. It's not a bad situation. None of them are bad options. It just looks like the kind of target co-op to me that we expected it to be. And I'm not scared that I'm missing ceiling on anybody here if I just don't have any of them.
No, yeah. I mean, there's not much ceiling on this offense. It's going to be, more conservative. Pats are going to try to win with their defense. Damian Harris, definitely the best option at this point. Like you said, 23 carries in the opener. He also got 3 targets, which isn't a huge number, but like usually New England's lead back is, getting like half a target a game. So, 3 targets is not bad for Damian Harris. Now he did lose that fumble at the end of the game that, cost the Patriots a chance to win. We'll see if that impacts the playing time. Ramondre Stevenson was benched early in this game for losing a fumble. He also blew a blitz pickup. So I don't think they trust him. I think Harris will go right back to the clear lead ball carrier. And it's a great spot for him as a 6-point favorite, like you said, against a pretty bad Jets defense. And I think Harris has a chance to get 20 carries again in this game.
Mm-hmm. We'll get our answer if J.J. Taylor is the starting running back in week 2.
Yeah.
On the Jets side, Corey Davis was all you could have hoped for in week 1. I think that you start him until he says otherwise.
Yes, you do. It was what we saw in the preseason. He's Zach Wilson's favorite target. That continued into week 1. Davis was 7th among receivers in expected fantasy points, so the usage was strong. I think that's it, right? That's the only guy you're starting on this offense. So Zach Wilson, I just want to say, long term, I'm buying Zach Wilson. He looks the part to me, but the O-line is horrible, and they just lost their left tackle for like a month, so it's going to continue to be horrible. So Wilson, he's going to struggle because of that. Like I think he's gonna hit. I think he's going to be a quality NFL starter once he has better pieces around him. But yeah, it's Corey Davis, and that's it right now. I'm still holding Elijah Moore. The playing time was there. He just missed a deep ball early in the game. He had a 22-yard reception called back by penalty late in the game. So he's still a hold for me. You obviously can't use him in fantasy lineups right now.
Yeah, good usage for him in the first game, bad performance. We had to know it was a possibility. We've got a rookie wide receiver. We've got a rookie quarterback playing their first game together. Still optimistic long-term. Maybe it doesn't work out, but I'm holding him for now as well. Obviously not playing him in week 2. And frankly, I'm kind of glad that we didn't get anything to like from the Jets backfield in week 1, because now I don't have to pretend to like anybody from the Jets backfield.
I guess Michael Carter is still worth stashing, but otherwise I think you're better off just cutting these guys. You don't have to worry about it. Like, even if one goes down, they might call up P. Ryan and still have it as a 3-man committee.
Yeah, if I drafted Michael Carter, I'm not cutting him right now, but if somebody else in my league drops him, I'm not like, ooh, I got to go get Michael Carter.
Yes, that's fair.
Anything else from either side of that game?
Nope.
Minnesota at Arizona, Cardinals by 3.5, over under a 51 in that game. It was a strong day for the passing offense for Minnesota in the loss to Cincinnati. And I think the biggest note for that is they checked in 17th in neutral pass rate in that game. That's up from 27th overall for last season. So, we'll see if that's just a one-game thing or if they're going to throw the ball a little bit more this year. Can't say that after week 1, but it's definitely worth watching. And it wasn't just a matter of trailing. They didn't fall. They were 2 touchdowns behind in the third quarter, I believe it was. But they were more pass than run even in the first half of that game. So there's a chance that they throw the ball a bit more than they were before.
They also had 3 wide receivers on the field, much more than they have in the past, which is, why you got the game you did out of KJ Osborne. And, to me, having 3 wide receivers on the field, that's just good news for Kirk Cousins. Like, you'd rather have a 3rd wide receiver out there than a fullback or a 2nd tight end. So kind of arrow up for Cousins. The O-line, I think, is a concern, especially in this game after what, Chandler Jones did to Tennessee. So that'd be my concern with Cousins. But otherwise, I like him in this game. I still think Arizona's secondary is beatable, even though, Tennessee struggled. But I think Cousins is going to get decent volume if they're playing from behind. I think Jefferson and Thielen should get open against this secondary.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned KJ Osborne. He was near Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson in playing time. He tied Jefferson with 9 targets, just 1 behind Thielen's team lead. If Minnesota does keep passing more, and again, that's something we're going to have to watch. We certainly can't say they did it in week 1. We're going to expect it going forward. KJ Osborne has a shot to be relevant, especially because of the, I guess, kind of muted tight end position for this team now.
Yeah, I think Osborne should be owned in fantasy leagues of like 12 plus teams, and he could be someone you use in bye weeks. He's still the clear 4th option in the offense behind Cook and the 2 wide receivers. And then even, Conklin and Osborne might rotate weeks as kind of that 4th option. But Osborne's playing time was there. The volume was there in one game. So he's worth a stash.
Yeah, put him on my radar this week. And I'm not using him in my week 2 lineups, but he's on my radar now, where he honestly was not before.
Yep.
On the Arizona side, it went about as well as it could have in Tennessee. You have to keep in mind that Titans defense is probably going to finish the year as one of the worst in the league.
Yeah, it will. But just more of the same from Kyler Murray is what we saw last year before his shoulder injury. Murray led all quarterbacks in fantasy points in week 1. And that was despite running he carried 5 times for 20 yards. He did score. But it wasn't a big rushing game. He did it with his arm. And if he's, going to take a step forward as a passer and still do what he does rushing, Murray, I don't know. Murray or Mahomes right now would be my bet to lead quarterbacks and fantasy points this season. And I might even give a slight lean to Kyler Murray.
I could see that. The reason to not draft Patrick Mahomes was always that we could see Kyler Murray outscoring him pretty easily, and you could get him at a round and a half to 2 round discount. So, yeah, nothing shocking on that front. I guess the most shocking thing was probably Christian Kirk reemerging from being dead. Ran twice as many slot routes as Rondale Moore did in this game.
Yeah, I guess this is where preseason can lead us astray, because it was Kirk as Arizona's starting slot receiver in this game. He ran out on 62% of the pass plays. Rondale Moore just 38%. I guess kind of good news, bad news for Rondale Moore. Like, he saw 5 targets on his 14 pass routes, so like he was getting open. Murray was looking for him, but you can't use a guy in fantasy lineups running a route on just 38% of the pass plays. So Rondale Moore is bench stash. Christian Kirk should have been picked up in most leagues. Like, I'd say leagues of 10 plus teams for Kirk. He should be owned. Still behind AJ Green in playing time, but I mean, Green looked like crap again. So it might not be long. Hopefully we get Kirk, Rondale Moore, Hopkins. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work with the slot stuff, but those should be Arizona's 3 top receivers before long.
That's not going to happen. It's because they're going to trot AJ Green out all season because they paid him. And that was my concern for Rondale Moore. Not that he couldn't get the ball or that they didn't like him, but that they're just going to spread it around. There are too many guys that this is Cliff. A good game for Rondale Moore.
Do the right thing, Cliff. Come on.
Yeah, we'll see. The RB carries, by the way, for that team, 16 for James Conner, 12 for Chase Edmonds. Edmonds got all 4 running back targets. So you like the game for his usage. He also showed kind of his limitations. There's not a whole lot of touchdown upside here, but he's usable.
Well, yeah. So I thought this was an encouraging game for Edmonds. Edmonds and Connor both got 1 carry inside the 10-yard line. So they split that work. We didn't get any carries inside the 5. So and inside the 10 is not even really like goal line carry. So I don't know what it means yet, but we'll see. Edmonds dominated the passing game work, which we expected. That's good. And the carries, I mean, Connor ended up out carrying him 16 to 12. Connor got 5 carries on the final drive when Arizona was up by 25 points. So, it was basically even before that. So I think the arrow is pointing up for Chase Edmonds. I think he's, a weekly RB2 in PPR and, at least an RB3 in non-PPR.
Yeah, good usage for him. Before we get away from this game that does include the Titans, quick question from YouTube. Got offered Najee Harris and CeeDee Lamb for Derrick Henry. So would be trading away Derrick Henry for Najee Harris and CeeDee Lamb. Understandably conflicted. Jared, what's your lean in that case?
Is it PPR? We have to know if it's PPR. I would do it for sure.
Yeah, I would
do it if it was PPR.
I think in PPR I would make the trade as well, and if it's anything short of full PPR, I would stick with Derrick Henry.
I think even in a half, I would do it.
I could see it.
We're going to get to the Titans' offense here. I'm worried about Tennessee's offense, and if they're not good and the defense sucks, like that's going to be a lot of bad game scripts for Henry.
All right, let's go ahead. Let's skip ahead to the Tennessee game at Seattle. We'll go back to the other couple games on our list in between. But Tennessee at Seattle, Seahawks by 5, over under a 53.5. And like you just kind of alluded to, it was a bad week 1 for Tennessee. They checked in 31st in offensive DVOA, only ahead of Green Bay. So, I mean, I guess we have to that's worth noting in that if we think that Tennessee is in awful shape, then what do we say about Green Bay? And, obviously it's not quite that black and white, but It is 1 week. So what's the concern here?
I mean, if you watch the game, you have to be concerned. I think Tannehill didn't look good. PFF had him 25th in passing grades. And I talked a lot this summer how I was worried about Arthur Smith's departure. And Atlanta's offense sucked too. So, I don't know. Maybe it's not that. But Ryan Tannehill, what's made him so good the past couple of years is how good he's been in the play action game. He was top 6 last year in yards per attempt and PFF passing grade on play action passes. And Tennessee went play action on 36% of their passes last year. They called play action on just 11% of their passes in week 1. And maybe it's game script. Maybe, they're playing from behind. They don't think they need to, show run or whatever. We'll see. But I was concerned about the offense to begin with. And obviously week 1, didn't make me feel any better about it.
Yeah. Derek Brown of FTN pointed out this summer that Todd Downing, in his previous stint as offensive coordinator with the 2017 Raiders, did not run much play action. And as you just mentioned, Ryan Tannehill has thrived on play action in Tennessee. I guess going in, I would think that given that Todd Downing coached under Arthur Smith last year with this team, he'd be like, oh, this play action stuff seems to be going pretty well for these Titans. And we have Derrick Henry. So play action, even if I'm not buying into play action working in general, which you probably should based on the research that's out there at this point, you should at least buy it for Derrick Henry's offense. So you would think that the guy would be like, all right, I need to add play action to my general scheme. Maybe that still happens, but it didn't happen in week 1. So that's definitely a concern combined with just what Tennessee did on offense in that game.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line struggled. You had Taylor Lewan taking to Twitter saying, like, I'm going to be better because I just got my butt kicked by Chandler Jones. So that's a concern. Julio Jones, like, it's only one game. I'm not panicking, but he didn't look great, obviously. And if he's not Julio Jones, like, there's not much weaponry outside of AJ Brown and Henry. So I don't know. I'm definitely I'm way more concerned about Tennessee than I am like Green Bay or any of these other offenses that struggled in week 1.
I agree with that. I think you have to play Derrick Henry and AJ Brown this week. Julio Jones, a lot more iffy. It really depends on who you're weighing him against, but it is at least a positive matchup with a shaky set of Seattle corners.
Yeah, I mean, Julio's already lost like must start status for me, but I mean, you'd have to be loaded at receiver, which some teams might be to bench Julio, but I'd lean towards giving him one more week.
Ryan Tannehill, I think, is still in play. I would definitely play Kirk Cousins over him this week. Tannehill, Joe Burrow, Baker Mayfield would be a tight call among those guys. I think the positive here is that Carson Wentz threw for 251 and 2 touchdowns against Seattle last week. So that makes me want to give Ryan Tannehill and the new offense one more week to see. But in that range, I got it's picking a name out of a hat among those 3. I would probably play Tannehill over Joe Burrow. I would probably ultimately lean Baker Mayfield, but that one's really a coin flip.
I mean, I think at least you have the high over under. Tennessee's implied for 23.5 points. It's a decent number, but like I had so much Titans and DFS last week, and I kept waiting on the second half for Tannehill to get some garbage time numbers, and he couldn't even do it then. It's like I'm just I'd start Baker over him this week. I think just because I think Brown's offense is going to put points on the board. I'm not sure I can say the same about Tennessee.
Yeah, I think that would be my thinking as well if I had that decision to make. So we'll see. On the Seattle side, I think it's not very dramatic because you're playing everybody who makes sense. Gerald Everett might be a little bit inflated right now by the fact that he scored a TD in week 1 because he was even with Will Dissly in week 1 playing time and got 1 fewer target than Dissly did.
Yeah, I mean, just 2 targets for Everett. Dissly had 3, as you said. Dissly ran a few more pass routes. So someone, I can't remember who it was, but someone said it, it's kind of like Higbee and Everett last year under, Sean McVay. Now you have Shane Waldron in the McVay disciple, using 2 tight ends. I think it's going to continue. I still think Everett is the better fantasy bet, but just be careful. Again, if he hadn't scored last week, it would look like a dud.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from that game?
No, I mean, Chris Carson, RB1, which we kind of knew, but I mean, losing Penny, Rashad Penny's going to miss at least this game with a calf injury. That only helps Carson's workload.
Oh, yeah. I've been smiling about Chris Carson since draft season. So we'll move on from that game and back to Atlanta at Tampa Bay, where the Bucs are 12-point favorites. So the over-under 52 points might make you think that it's like a shootout and you want pieces all over this game. But the implied totals for this contest are 32 for the Bucs and 20 for the Falcons. And that is exactly how it should be, if not even giving the Falcons a little bit too much credit for this one. I'll play Calvin Ridley. I will play Kyle Pitts. And I will play no other Falcon. I think Kyle Pitts is the one where people watch what he did last week and they're like, maybe I was wrong about Kyle Pitts. But the usage was good. He was just out of bounds with a catch on his first target of the game. So obviously that one went for an incompletion, but was a catch. He lost another reception to an offensive PI call on a teammate. So there's 2 catches that he could have had. He had 22.9% target share for that game against Philly. And he also had an 18-yard catch that was Atlanta's longest play of the game. So, I mean, overall, it was a fine game for Kyle Pitts in a game where his offense stunk overall. 3rd among tight ends in our expected fantasy points model, too. Yeah,
usage was like everything you could have hoped for, if not even better. He ran a route on 80% of the pass plays. Pitts was in the slot or out wide on 76% of his snaps. So, he basically was playing wide receiver. So that's perfect. The concern is the offense. Like I guess if Tennessee is the offense I'm most concerned about, I would put Atlanta at number 2. Just an ugly performance against, we'll see how good the Eagles defense ends up being. I don't know. But Matt Ryan did not look good. He was 26th in the NFL in PFF week 1 passing grades. And Arthur Smith, by the way, it's just 1 week. But it looks like he brought Tennessee's offense to Atlanta. Atlanta was 31st in situation neutral pass rate. So they were trying to run the ball, which is obviously what they did in Tennessee. And then Atlanta was also, they easily led the league in use of 2 tight ends at 47%, which is, what Arthur Smith did in Tennessee. And that's not a bad idea in Atlanta when you have Kyle Pitts and Hayden Hurst. But I don't know. I was hoping Smith would adjust his offense to the personnel in Atlanta. And, through 1 week, it doesn't look like he's done that.
Yeah, he was like, obviously, I know we don't have Derrick Henry here. And then his offense is like, I think we have Derrick Henry here. Atlanta, 5th highest, as you mentioned, situation neutral run rate, depending on where you look at the measures from. So, I mean, it's just nothing to like here. On the other side, let's go to Tampa, and you play everyone unless they're a running back, because Bruce Arians says that Ronald Jones is going to start this game, and I say he's definitely not starting for my team.
No, he's not for mine either. I was planning on starting Leonard Fournette in some spots. I still might, because, again, you have the 32-point implied total for Tampa. The Falcons' D is not good. There's going to be a lot of touchdowns to go around here. Fournette's usage was like better than even I expected, and I was optimistic about Fournette this season. But he played 65% of the snaps, 9 carries and 7 targets. I obviously had the drop that turned into an interception. But I mean, now that Ronald Jones is starting, I don't know what to make of it, because Jones could get off to a hot start against this defense, and then Fournette, doesn't see the field as much. So still a wait and see situation. I think Jones and Fournette are both in the RB3 mix, just because, again, if we think Tampa's going to score 4 or 5 touchdowns, there's touchdown upside to both of those guys.
I'll give him that. And Bruce Arians clearly likes Ronald Jones, because there have been plenty of things where he could say, Ronald's going to have to prove it to me, and he doesn't. He's like, no, Ronald's my starter.
I think it's a love-hate thing. The guy fumbles in the opener, he doesn't see the field the rest of the game. I don't know. It's strange.
Yeah, it's clear that he wants to keep bringing him back, though. So it's going to be to the detriment of all of our fantasy teams. So let's move on to Dallas Cowboys at the LA Chargers. The Chargers by 3.5 in this game, over under 55.5. It's up 3.5 from where it opened. And I mean, this is where it's going to be at for fantasy this week. The Chargers implied total is up 2 from where it opened. The Cowboys are up 1.5. The Cowboys, of course, posted big numbers at Tampa last week on Thursday night. The Chargers, meanwhile, racked up 424 total yards, only 20 points against Washington in week 1. Dallas, since that game where there was plenty scoring on both sides, has lost both defensive ends. Randy Gregory's on the COVID list right now. DeMarcus Lawrence fractured his foot in practice on Wednesday, so both of those guys will be out for this game. Safety Donovan Wilson's also nursing a groin injury, so he's iffy. It's already not good defense, losing multiple starters. There should be lots of points. I'm starting everybody.
Should be lots of points. This should be the most popular DFS game of the week. I guess we'll start with the Chargers. You were mentioning all the Dallas defensive injuries. I mean, I loved what I saw from the Chargers offense last week. They didn't put a ton of points up on the board. Herbert didn't have a massive fantasy game, but I thought Justin Herbert looked great. They had, we talk about Mike Williams, in just a more diverse role than he's played in really his career so far. He's just running more routes. You can go to the next gen stats page and look at Mike Williams' route tree. It's not just deep stuff. He's kind of running everything. So that's exciting to see. The offensive line was awesome. All the O-line gurus that I follow on Twitter were going nuts about how well the Chargers O-line played, especially Rashawn Slater, their rookie tackle. Herbert had the lowest pressure rate in the entire league in week 1. Facing Washington's pass rush might be, the best pass rush in the league. So I'm excited about the Chargers offense. And, this is obviously the week I think it turns into fantasy points against this Cowboys defense.
Yes, I absolutely agree with all that. And, you try to say it's 1 week, don't overreact, but the Mike Williams stuff, that comes after a summer of them talking him up, his quarterback saying he's ready to break out. Everybody around the Chargers said Mike Williams is going to do some stuff this year. So when something like that changes following how the summer went for him, I'm buying it with Mike Williams for sure. I don't think I think you really hit it on everything over there. Jared Cook is now in starter range for us.
Yep.
Jared and I were talking about before the show, Jared Cook against Mark Andrews. I'm playing Jared Cook over Mark Andrews. We'll get to Andrews' issues with the Ravens game lower, but what you like about Jared Cook was his involvement, his target share in week 1, and all of the good things that you just said about the Chargers offense in general.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little lower on Cook than you, but he's a top 10 tight end for me this week. I don't even know his DFS price, but I'm assuming he's probably cheaper than he should be, so he's going to be a good DFS play. Cook was 4th in expected fantasy points among tight ends. And now he gets a Cowboys defense that, Rob Gronkowski just ripped for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns. So definitely a good spot for Cook.
I agree. I like everything on the Chargers side except for Larry Roundtree stealing snaps from Justin Jackson in week 1.
The Dallas any Austin Ekeler targets this week?
I mean, we've got to. Wasn't this the issue last season? Didn't we not get any Austin Ekeler targets in week 1 and then they came back?
Yeah, I think you might be right. He didn't get many in week 1 because it was Tyrod. I mean, he's going to be plenty involved in the passing game. He might not be as involved as we thought he was going to be. Just again, if Mike Williams is going to play that big of a role and Jared Cook's going to do it, like it might be 4 or 5 targets per game for Ekeler versus 6, 7, 8 we were possibly expecting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not worried about anything there. This time last year, we were like, I wonder if Austin Ekeler and Joshua Kelly are going to be splitting the backfield. And then Joshua Kelly quickly went into witness protection. So Austin Ekeler is going to need a string of worrisome games before I'm going to start worrying about him.
Agreed.
On the Dallas side, I mean, I'm still playing everybody. And yes, that does include Zeke Elliott. I mean, week 1 obviously went worse than any of us could have guessed, even those of us who said, watch out, this is the toughest run defense in the league, and it's probably going to be a bad game for Zeke Elliott. It was bad, and you can choose to worry that Dallas didn't try to get him more yardage in that game, but why would they try to get him more yardage against Vita Vea when they have CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup for a little while, and they can do what they were doing passing the ball? It makes total sense for them to limit Zeke Elliott's exposure in that game and throw the ball instead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was a great game plan from Dallas. Perfect. And Zeke's usage was awesome. He played 84% of the snaps. He ran her out on 72% of the pass plays. He had 11 of the 14 running back carries. That's 79%. I mean, he only had 2 targets, which you could say is concerning. But again, if he's running that many pass routes, 72% is a great number. He should see more targets. So the usage is awesome. He looked a step slow to me. And PFF agreed. PFF had him dead last in rushing grades among 49 running backs that had 5+ carries in week 1. PFF didn't have him with a single missed tackle forced on his, 12 or 13 touches. So to me, I'm not like a film expert, so I'm not going to weigh that too heavily. And like, if he's getting that usage in this offense, I think he's going to be fine. But I don't know. I just think to me, he's not prime Zeke anymore.
Yeah, he's not prime Zeke, and my answer to that is I don't care. I mean, he's getting the usage. He's playing in an offense that's going to be one of the best for the year. I don't care how good he is at this point, because as long as he's getting the ball, he's going to score points. I mean,
the only concern.
Go ahead.
The only concern is like, when does that mean Tony Pollard starts taking more work? That's my only concern. Maybe next year, yeah, could be.
Yeah, we'll see. Anything else from Dallas before we move on?
No, Blake Jarwin and Dalton Schultz are in like a tight end committee, so unfortunately you can't really trust either, even though the passing volume's great. We should mention Michael Gallup is out for like a month, and Cedric Wilson is the wide receiver 3 there now. So he's in like the KJ Osborne. I like him a bit better than KJ Osborne just because the offense, but kind of similar types.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with both of those comments. Now on to the Sunday night game, Kansas City at Baltimore. Chiefs by 4 for this one, over under of 55.5. Beyond the obvious Chiefs, I think week 1 quietly went well for Mecole Hardman. 3 targets only and a poor PFF grade, which makes it look like a bad game for him. But he ranked 2nd among Chiefs wideouts and routes. Demarcus Robinson was close behind him in that category and graded even worse than Hardman did. Byron Pringle way behind in that category, just like we saw in preseason, and also graded worse. So grading poorly is not going to hurt Mecole Hardman in this case. I think combine those factors with that injury-battered Baltimore cornerback room that we talked about with the Raiders game last week, and Hardman has some sneaky upside this week.
He does. He has upside every week if he's going to get that usage as far as snaps and routes. I don't think he's good. Like I think it's like Henry Ruggs. Like he's going to be on the field, but you can be on the field, and if you're not good, like you're not going to get targets. And it's tough playing with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, obviously. Like that's Mahomes' first and second read every play. But I don't know. Hardman's going to have some big games, but I think he's going to have just as many duds. So like in season long lineup setting leagues, it's kind of tough to know what to do with him.
Yeah, I mean, it's not somebody that you need to get into lineups, but if you're looking way down the list for some upside, I think you can do worse than Hardman in a flex spot for this one, especially because there's a chance that they don't try to run the ball as much against this Baltimore defense that it shapes up that way, as we said with the Raiders talk earlier. Speaking of running the ball, by the way, not a great opener for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, I like to think that the touch volume will improve for him going forward when they're not chasing the whole game like they were against the Browns. And I mean, the Chiefs are never chasing the entire game like they were in week one. So maybe that was just a fluky outcome for that reason.
Edwards-Helaire is like in the same boat as Hardman, not to the same extent, but like I don't think he's like anything special. Again, I don't know. He was a bad first round pick. I'll say that. Now he's going to be fine because he's the clear lead back on Kansas City. Like you said, the usage was there, 14 of the 15 running back carries. 3 targets, that should come up a bit. But again, like Mahomes is clearly looking for Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce on every play. So I don't think you're going to get huge passing game volume out of CEH. I downgrade him to like an RB2 at this point. Like, and he has RB1 upside every week because of the offense, but RB2 for me for CEH.
Yeah, I mean, it's an offense that doesn't need to give him more work than they want to. They can just lean on the passing game all the time if they feel like it.
Yep.
On the Baltimore side, the offense did not look particularly good against the Raiders in week one, ranked 23rd in Football Outsiders DVOA. I would say encouraging work for Sammy Watkins and Marquise Brown, especially in terms of target share, but tougher matchups for them against the Chiefs this week. They're both outside our top 36 in the PPR rankings. That said, I would probably play each of those guys ahead of Mecole Hardman.
Sammy Watkins is going to do the thing again where he has a big week one and then just disappears because that's what he's done the past few years now. But yeah, I mean, Sammy Watkins led the Ravens wide receivers and pass routes. He led the entire team with the 8 targets, a 27% target share. So, and there really should be elevated passing volume from Baltimore in this game if they're playing catch up with the Chiefs. So I like Brown ahead of Hardman for sure. Do we have Hardman ahead of Brown? We'll have to change that if we do. Sure. And then Watkins and Hardman are a toss up for me.
Yeah, I would say Watkins and Hardman are like a personal choice, decision. The thing I like is I think Watkins is a better bet for targets than Hardman is, but obviously either one could pop for a touchdown and make the decision for it.
Yep.
The guy that we disagreed on, as I mentioned, is Mark Andrews, and we know that he always has the kind of game in him that he had against Vegas in week one, which was a bad one. 5 targets. I think he caught 3 for 20 yards. He's also been bad the past 2 times against Kansas City, faced them each of the past 2 years. Last year, it was 3 catches for 22 yards on 8 targets. Year before, it was 3 catches for 15 yards on 7 targets. So I think for me, when you combine those 2 games with a rough week one for him, a disappointing week one, let's say, overall for the Baltimore offense, he's still in tight end 1 territory, but I'm playing, I think the 2 guys that you have a chance of also having on your roster that I would play ahead of Mark Andrews are Tyler Higbee and Jared Cook for the reasons that we already mentioned for both of those guys.
Yeah, Higbee I have no issue with. Like, I might lean Andrews, but I think they're very close because, again, Higbee got the usage he did, which was right up there with Andrews. But the thing to like about Andrews, he ran a pass route on 95% of the pass plays in week one, where that's sometimes been the concern with him is they'll mix in Nick Boyle or whoever else, and Andrews will only be at like 60% of their routes or something. So that was good to see. And then even the matchup, like there's nothing about the actual matchup that worries me. Like they've shut him down twice. Maybe they make Andrews a focal point, which they probably should. But I mean, I think he's plenty capable of having a nice game. So it's like a case of like I took this guy as tight end 5 or tight end 6. Like I'm going to stick with him this early in the season and not overreact to what we saw in week one.
It probably helps that I wasn't taking Mark Andrews, so I don't start out with a soft spot for him. But I'm going to go ahead and react to what we saw from the Chargers and that matchup with the Cowboys and take a shot on Jared Cook, especially because I think that's a game that we want to get into. Last point on the Ravens is Tyson Williams looked okay early in that game against the Raiders, but then he wound up with just 9 carries versus 10 for Latavius Murray. So, I mean, ultimately, I don't think we're playing either of those guys.
So it was 7 carries for Tyson to 3 for Latavius in the first half of that game. And then Latavius outcarried Tyson 7-2 in the second half. And I know Tyson Williams, I think he blew a blitz pickup. He had the fumble on the exchange with Lamar Jackson. So I think that combination sort of, Baltimore kind of didn't want to trust them much in the second half. Hopefully they get it ironed out because like Williams looks good. Like that touchdown run was impressive. Like, the burst, and Latavius Murray did not look good to me. Like I think Latavius Murray is just about washed. Baltimore promoted Devontae Freeman to the active roster over Le'Veon Bell, it looks like. So it's going to be Williams, Murray, and Freeman in the backfield this week. I still think Tyson is the best fantasy bet, and I think he's an RB3 option. But there's definitely some risk involved just because we don't know exactly how the work's going to be split.
Yeah, I can't even name the specific players that I would be weighing him against, but if that's what your decision already in week 2, you're in rough shape at running back. I think the fact that the Ravens believe adding Devontae Freeman helps their backfield is the clearest sign that their backfield stinks right now.
Yeah, again, I thought Tyson looked good, but they might just not trust him.
I mean, even his touchdown run, he basically got through the line and then he had to beat one guy to the end zone. So I don't know, it was fine.
I thought he beat some angles with the speed, but
yeah, we'll see. Certainly need more than speed, which is what the Ravens seem to say about his play on Monday night. So we'll see where that goes. I agree that he's the first Ravens running back in, but not anybody I'm reaching for this week. Final game that I am reaching for, Detroit at Green Bay on Monday night. The Packers by 11 in this one, and over under 48.5. So you know that Vegas is not expecting a lot of points from the Lions in this game. Let's start by giving Jared Goff a little credit. He finished 9th among fantasy quarterbacks in week 1, 338 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, did attempt 57 passes. So it was like a classic Rams game where he was like not that good, but he just kept throwing the ball. 31 of those pass attempts went to TJ Hawkinson, DeAndre Swift, and Jamal Williams. And that, not coincidentally, is the entire list of Lions that I'm considering for fantasy use this week.
Yeah, I mean, credit Goff and credit the Lions for knowing who their best players are. Like this offense should revolve around Hawkinson and the running back. So I mean, again, Hawkinson to me, like I'd rather have Hawkinson than George Kittle the rest of the way. So Hawkinson is my tight end 3 weekly starter, obviously. DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams. Swift's a weekly starter at this point. The production between those guys was similar between Swift and Williams, but Swift basically doubled Williams up in snaps. Swift basically doubled Williams up in pass routes. So Swift's the guy there. Williams had the big game. We mentioned him before. It's like a sell candidate. You can try to sell him if someone thinks he's like a top 20 back the rest of the way. I do still think he's going to be like an RB3 in PPR though. Again, just because he's the third option in this offense, even if he's the second running back. It's Swift, Hawkinson, and then Williams is the top 3 options in the offense.
Yeah, I think that I don't think Williams is like an aggressive sell right now. I think that if somebody comes to you trying to get Williams for a running back that has RB1 upside, I would go ahead and sell him. But otherwise, I'm happy to hold him and use him because I think throughout the year, obviously we're not going to see quite this volume of targets for these guys every game, but they're kind of going to be the focal point of this offense because there's not a whole lot else going for it.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of games where the Lions are playing from behind like they were in week 1, and there's going to be a lot of garbage time for the Lions, which you don't want to count on, but you kind of can because it's going to happen a lot for Detroit.
Williams is a fringe RB2 for me this week. Among guys ahead of him in our rankings right now, I would play Jamal Williams over Mike Davis.
I'm trying to figure out who I should start in the main event. I need 2 out of Saquon, Jamal Williams, and Leonard Fournette.
Oof.
I know.
Jamal Williams is the easiest starter among those 3 for me.
I think so, yeah. I was ready to go Williams and Fournette before the Ronald Jones starting news, so we'll see.
Yeah, that might push me toward Barkley because I would be madder if I lost because I didn't play Barkley than if I didn't play Fournette, but I can understand the difficulty.
Yep.
Back to the Packers side in this game, I'm going back to the usual guys, even though they did nothing in week 1. And that had to be the most shocking performance of week 1 was the Packers just going completely belly up against the Saints, and not even a home Saints game, but like an on-the-road home Saints game. So thank goodness for us and them that they get a Detroit matchup in week 2. We can go back to using Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones. Beyond that, I think Robert Tonyan, in play at his usual level. Beyond that, the guy I'm looking at is Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who quietly led the Packers with 8 targets last week, and he spent 53.6% of his pass snaps in the slot, which is a higher rate than any game last season, where he finished the year at about 33% slot rate.
Nice. I mean, I was kind of surprised it was Allen Lazard as the third receiver for the Packers. I kind of thought it'd be Randall Cobb, Aaron Rodgers' boy. I thought it'd be him in the slot with Adams and MVS on the outside, but they're evidently gonna use Lazard on the outside, MVS in the slot. MVS was also fourth among all wide receivers in air yards in week 1. So I'm still optimistic. Probably not a guy you need to start at this point, but I mean the matchup's right again. So MVS would not be the worst wide receiver flyer for week 2.
I would play MVS over Mecole Hardman this week.
I'm in, baby. Let's do it.
All right. That's going to do it for this week 2 preview edition of the podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now to see our full week 2 rankings to help you finalize those lineup decisions. Check the My Teams page for custom lineup recommendations, plus the Who Should I Start tool, Free Agent Finder, the Trade Partner Navigator. Lots more to help you with all your lineup decisions this week. And speaking of winning lineups, we're going to be back here tomorrow night for our pair of DFS shows with our new buddy Mitch Carl. So be sure to check those out. You can also find us anytime in the free Draft Sharks Discord. You can find a link to join that in the description for this podcast, wherever you're consuming it. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.